Hello, my name is Greg Owens. I'm the Deputy Commissioner with the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services and the Director of the Office of Youth Justice. And I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to our session today with Flourish Agenda on the healing-centered engagement. Our agency is moving into a healing framework in addition to the other work that we do to advance a positive criminal and youth justice agenda for the state of New York. We believe that healing is the next natural step after the work that we've done with regard to resilience and dealing with trauma. There is additional work to be done, and we believe that the healing-centered engagement framework is an opportunity for us to do that. We certainly are pleased that you're here today to hear and learn more about this from Flourish Agenda and the author of the framework, Dr. Shawn Ginwright. I happened upon this work about 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm so pleased to be able to bring it to the state with the help and support of the Youth Justice Institute and funding from the Juvenile Justice Advisory Group of the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services. I think you're going to be pleased and excited by the work. We have wonderful presenters, and so I look forward to spending this time with you today and after for the rest of the year as we develop implementation plans to move this forward. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is introduce the Commissioner of the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services, who is Mike Green, who is very supportive of our work and our youth justice agenda, and it's very wonderful he's taken the opportunity to be with us today with the busy schedule that he has. So Mike, thank you so much. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Greg. It's a tough act to follow. I don't have Greg's radio voice, so you're stuck with the voice that I have. But I just want to take a minute and also welcome everybody on behalf of the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services. I want to thank all of our partners, Greg and all of his team working in our youth justice area, our partners at the Office of Children and Family Services, our partners at the Youth Justice Institute, our partners on the Juvenile Justice Advisory Group, SUNY Albany, and so many others. For everybody who worked with us to make this happen, thank you. We really appreciate it. At first blush, you might think that, maybe we had some bad luck with timing in terms of this event, given COVID, and this was supposed to be an in-person gathering, and we're doing this virtually, and there were delays. But I think if you look at where we are in New York, you could make an argument that this is the perfect time for this event. After several years of significant declines in shootings in most of our cities across the state, this year we're seeing something different. We have roughly 40 to 200% increases in shootings in many of our cities across the state. And again, I think it's important to keep in context that we're comparing that's a year-over-year increase. We're comparing it to last year, which in many state or cities was the lowest number we've had, but still very significant increases. In the same neighborhoods where a lot of this is happening are neighborhoods which have also been disproportionately impacted by COVID and all of the trauma that's associated with that. So I think from that perspective, this is the ideal time to be doing what we're doing. As all of you know, the neighborhoods that we're talking about have significant trauma to start with. And when you add in what's happening between COVID and the shootings, it's something that needs to be dealt with an urgency now. So against that backdrop, again, I think it's very timely that we come together. We focus on issues around trauma and healing-centered engagement for our youth. I'd like to thank the Flourish Agenda for partnering with us on this event, and particularly Dr. Shawn Ginwright for taking the time to be with us and to share your expertise and experience in this area. It's my hope by the end of these sessions that we'll have a better understanding of trauma, how it impacts our youth, and most importantly, be armed with tools that will help us collectively and effectively engage with our youth, help our youth heal, and produce better outcomes, both for our youth and for all of us collectively. So again, for everyone who's participating today, thank you. I know everyone's busy. We appreciate you. We appreciate the work that you do with our youth. We appreciate you being with us to help us move forward. So with that, thank you, and I'll turn it back over.
Hi, everyone. I'm Avery Irons, the Associate for Technical Assistance at the New York State Youth Justice Institute. On behalf of the YJI, it's my pleasure to offer you a warm welcome and many thanks for joining this powerful event today. Some of you may have attended our forum in June titled COVID-19 in Youth, Are the Kids All Right? And throughout that event, healing for youth, families, and historically oppressed communities wove itself in and out of the conversations. So while we were disappointed that the pandemic forced the delay of today's event from its original run dates in March, the current historical moment and conversations about injustice, trauma, moving forward, and healing make this conversation incredibly timely today. And we were thankful now to be able to offer it to a much wider audience in virtual format. To note that this will be available as a recording on the YJI website and our YouTube channel after the event is over. And so with many thanks to Flourish Agenda and appreciation for what they have come to teach us, I turn the mic over to them.
All right, thank you all so much for being here today. Good afternoon on the East Coast and good morning on the West Coast. Before we get started, we would like to offer up a few housekeeping items. Number one, feel free to chat with us throughout this experience. This is a conversation and it is a dialogue, which we love to hear your voice and love to hear what you have to say. So feel free to chat with us inside the chat box. Number two, if you need help, tech support, there's a number that you can text during this process. So don't feel like you're out here doing it alone. We are here to support you and engage with you and actively be with you through this process. And number three, you are being recorded. So smile, you're on camera. So anyhow, let's move forward. So thank you all for the beautiful introduction into this conversation that we're going to have today. On behalf of Flourish Agenda, we would like to welcome you all to the new paradigm, healing-centered engagement. We're so excited to have you all here and truly look forward to sharing our healing-centered approach created by Dr. Shawn Ginwright with everyone. And really it's in the hopes of building upon the trauma-informed practices that are already in place within your own individual organization. With that being said, we want to be clear that this journey that we're on through this work is not just about working with the young people. It's also about your own personal journey within the work that we do. So having said that, what I would like to do really quickly before we get started is take a poll. And so if you're unfamiliar with poll, we have a few options that will pop up on the screen and you can choose one of those options. Now, our poll question for the afternoon/morning is, when times get tough, what are some of your favorite ways to heal your mind and body? Okay, once again, when times get tough, what are some of the ways you like to heal your mind and body? Okay, we're gonna give you 30 seconds to go ahead and chime in your answer really quickly. And I'll read off some of the options just in case you don't see it. Talk it out is an option, work it out, retail therapy, meditate, watch a horrible TV show, yoga, or none of these work for me. Please select the answer that is more to your liking. Okay, so for example, number one is listen to music. Number two is talk it out. Number three is work it out. Number four is retail therapy. Number five is meditate. Number six is watch a horrible TV show. And number seven is yoga. And number eight is none of these work for me. Cool. We have about 5 seconds. All right. I got a few folks that said none of these work for me. I get it. Yeah. Somebody said add eating to the conversation. All right. Cool. Honestly, all of them actually really work for me. I would say that for myself, I really like working out. It really helps to alleviate some of that pressure, some of that stress. Cool. All right. Well, we'd like to thank you all for participating in this quick poll just to see what you all do in order to heal. And this is why we're here today. And so before we even get started, I would like to pivot this conversation and share a little bit about Flourish Agenda and the work that we do. Flourish Agenda is a national nonprofit consulting firm that works with youth of color, schools, youth-serving organizations, foundations, and local governments to build and implement strategies that allow young people to flourish. We've been around for 30 years, and I've been privileged enough to work with Flourish Agenda for 18 of those 30 years. Really privileged, and to do this healing center work with Dr. Shawn Ginwright has been an honor. And let me introduce myself before we even move forward. My name is Olafemi Bankole Akintunde, also known as Bank within the organization. And as a practitioner of healing-centered engagement alongside Flourish Agenda for 18 years, I've had the privilege of presenting to the California State University Young Men of Color Consortium, Teach for America. I've had the privilege of taking these healing-centered engagement practices inside of the Oakland Unified School District, as well as the juvenile justice system for the past 8 years. In addition, last year I served as the Director of Healing-Centered Engagement for Kittbridge Bay Area Schools, and currently serve as the Ubuntu Leadership Director of the Ubuntu Leadership Institute. So having said that, in a small but brief introduction into myself, it is an honor to be your host this morning. Now we're going to watch a short clip, but before we do that, I would like to introduce Dr. Shawn Ginwright, who will be speaking right after this clip. For those who are unfamiliar with Dr. Shawn Ginwright, he is one of the nation's leading innovators, provocateurs, and thought leaders on African-American youth activism, and youth development. He is a professor of education in Africana Studies Department and a senior research associate at San Francisco State University. Dr. Ginwright is also the founder and chief executive officer of Flourish Agenda, Incorporated. Without further ado, let's take a look at this clip.
There are more people incarcerated in the United States than all of the industrial countries in the world. And that reality impacts in ways that we have yet to imagine.
So many of us got wounds. Physical wounds are one thing, but also there's generational wounds. These are wounds inflicted by institutions that we've had to interact with, that our parents have, that our foreparents have. And not all of us are conscious of like we're wounded. And you may have been moving based on this wound that you weren't even conscious of. And then once we become conscious that we're somewhat wounded by it, what do we do? What do we do now?
Everybody that I know has gone through deep harm and has deep wounds that are being ignored. Those deep wounds that are being ignored is causing problems and has been causing a lot of deep conflict.
A lot of times, people that hurt others. That harm that we caused our neighborhood is something the same harm that's hurting them within us as well.
All my homies when I was younger are 6 feet under. I'm tired of seeing black and brown teen getting killed by guns. I'm sick and tired of that shit. We kill each other because we've been harmed by the systems. You have been harmed in so many ways. You're not realizing you're causing harm to other people because you've been harmed. And that's why healing justice is very important, because you have to heal from the system that harms you.
To get to that more just place, we need to be healed so that we don't recreate the same wounds that we've experienced or inflicted. We have to prioritize healing.
I want to say thank you to soon-to-be Dr. Corey Green from Holla for providing that clip. My name is Dr. Shawn Ginwright, and it is an honor and pleasure to be with you today to share with you some of the ideas around our work around healing-centered engagement. We also want to thank YJI and all of the players that have made this possible for you today. We are sitting as a society right in between trauma and transformation. We know that, for example, there's been ongoing exposure, disproportionate exposure to COVID, the COVID virus, to our communities. We also understand that there's ongoing trauma in our communities as a result of poverty, as a result of all of the challenges that show up in our after-school programs and in our schools and in our juvenile probation departments. We know also that, for example, we sit
with the possibility of transformation. We see the marches and we see mass numbers of people calling and crying out for a new way to support our young people. We see movements that are about the humanity of all of our communities, asking and crying out for a new way, a new paradigm to support our young people. And so as we sit between trauma and transformation, we are pleased to present you a pathway that we think has the possibility of transforming the way in which we work with young people. Our work around healing-centered engagement is based in 30 years of evidence-based research and ongoing hands-on sweat, working with young people, their families, and schools, grinding it out day in and day out with young people, but also backing that up with the state-of-the-art research. And so we hope that these ideas, that the context that we're about to provide you gives you a pathway, a new paradigm for healing our young people. But first, we need to understand the context of when we talk about trauma. So when we talk about trauma, we first have to understand that we have been sometimes given the term post-traumatic stress disorder. And while post-traumatic stress disorder is an important way to think about trauma, the term post-traumatic stress disorder was a term that was designed for soldiers who were coming out of war that displayed behavioral problems when they came back into a normalized society. And while post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is an important concept, it falls short of describing the kinds of trauma that our young people experience every day. So when we talk about the context of trauma, we have to shift from thinking about trauma as individual acts that happen occasionally to people to thinking about trauma as a social determinants of well-being and health. When we talk about social determinants, we have to look at the laws and the policies that actually create harm that exist in our environments. And so we use the term persistent traumatic stress environment. And persistent traumatic stress environment more accurately describes the ways in which trauma is a result of laws and policies and practices that are embedded in our institutions that reproduce harm for young people and for the adult allies. Poor housing, poor medical care, poverty, and ongoing physical violence, emotional violence that happen in homes and schools and neighborhoods take their toll on young people. And our institutions need to be prepared not only to just support young people with coping on those exposures, but completely healing from them. Persistent traumatic stress environment produces what one researcher, his name is James Garbarino, and the citation is in a book called Raising Children in a Socially Toxic Environment, written in 1997. James Garbarino says that just like there are physical toxins, you can think about physical toxins in your home or your work, and if you are exposed to those physical toxins over time, those physical toxins can make you sick. James Garbarino says that just like there are physical toxins, that there are social toxins, and those social toxins have the same impact on our well-being. Social toxins are things like fear, anxiety, stress, uncertainty, shame. These things are just as present in our environment as physical toxins, but oftentimes they go undiagnosed in our institutions. And as a result, we have usually one tool to deal with young people's exposure to social toxicity. Now, I know I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm just feeling y'all. So I'm gonna go a little bit off cuff. I wanna say that these social toxins don't just affect young people, y'all. They affect us as well. That the adults who support young people also are deeply influenced by these forms of trauma. Imagine how you felt when you saw what happened to Mr. Floyd. Everyone who witnessed that experienced some form of trauma. And as a result of our collective experience of trauma, We need institutions, schools, juvenile probation departments to be able to support young people and their adult allies with transforming their exposure into healing. Here's a model that I think helps us to understand how social toxicity has an influence on adults and young people, our relationships, as well as the institutions we're in. So when we talk about social toxicity are like rain clouds. And those rain clouds have a toxic impact at the individual level. They give us fear and anxiety and uncertainty. And those socially toxic rain clouds also have an influence on our relationships and the teams who we work with, and the relationships we have with other people. But those socially toxic clouds also have a toxic impact on the very institutions that produce values. Those institutions produce practices and policies that are toxic to our adults and young people. Then the institution itself produces its own toxic rain cloud, and it goes back out into society. Now, those toxic rain clouds don't come from anywhere. Those toxic rain clouds are the result of racism, classism, transphobia, heterosexism, and all the structural inequality and mindsets and social challenges that have a toxic impact on all our capacity to be more fully human. So in order for us to talk about healing, we have to come up with a new way to deal with our exposure to social toxicity at the individual level, at the interpersonal level, as well as the institutional level. We cannot transform or change institutions only by changing the policies of that institution. We have to change the relationships, and we have to also change our individual mindsets. And so when we talk about healing-centered engagement, it builds upon trauma-informed care. And it builds upon trauma-informed care in the following ways. The first thing, it acknowledges how trauma is experienced collectively, not just individually. As I shared with you, all of us experienced some form of trauma when we saw what happened with Mr. Floyd. But you can go to any city in this country, whether it's East Oakland, whether it's the Bronx or West Philadelphia or Detroit, no matter where you're from, you could talk to young people of color. They're going to have a similar experience with police, with their schools, and sometimes even with adults that are in their environment. There's a collective experience with trauma. And if it's collective, then we also have to have a collective response. The second is that when we talk and think about trauma, we have to think of it, move from a medical model of thinking about trauma as only a form of treatment to individuals who've experienced some form of disruption, and think and understand that trauma exists in the environment as a result of laws and policies that have an impact on everyone in that environment, not just the individual. That means that we cannot assume that just one person or one young person has experienced trauma. We have to assume that everybody's experienced some form of trauma. Because if we think about only focusing on individuals, we're thinking and using a medical model approach as opposed to a collective approach. The third distinction, this third distinction is that we have to focus on the restoration and healing rather than coping with symptoms. And when we talk about coping with symptoms, oftentimes we are trained, as I am trained as a sociologist and a youth development professional. My goal and my work with young people has been so much focused on getting young people to reduce symptomology, like reduction of anger, reduction of anxiety, reduction of depression. And while that's important, young people never fully heal from their exposure to ongoing trauma. And so as a result of that, we have to think about wellness and well-being as the ultimate goal of our engagement with young people. Some of the research by Isaac Prelatinsky at the University of Miami suggests that when we engage young people in a sense of agency, when they can understand the issues that are in their community, that facilitates a sense of power and control over their environment, which cultivates well-being. And so the third distinction is that we have to focus on the restoration and healing rather than only coping with symptomology. And lastly, and most importantly, that healing-centered engagement focuses on the restoration of the adult allies that support young people. It assumes that oftentimes, again, as I was trained as a youth development professional and as a researcher and professor, I was trained that as the adult, that my role is to provide the kind of supports that young people need so that they could become healthy, full adults. But I know that I still got issues as an adult, that I still have concerns and worries as an adult. I know that my work in East Oakland and San Francisco and in parts of New York and in Philadelphia, when I go and work there, that has an impact on me as well. And so the fourth and important part of our healing-centered engagement is that it focuses on the provider. It focuses on your well-being, because we understand that in order for young people to be well, their adult allies have to be well as well, right? They have to be well in that process. We call that a parallel process of well-being. That means it's not a one-way street where the adult provides the recipe, the medicine for healing, but it means that the adult is engaged in his or her own healing process as well. It means that we ask questions about our own insecurities. It means that we examine our own racial bias. It means that we get underneath our own gendered perceptions. It means that we begin to uncover those things that prevent us from being more human with one another and with the young people that we want to support. So how do we integrate healing-centered engagement? Right? What does that look like? Let's first provide a definition of what I mean by healing-centered engagement. So when I say healing-centered engagement is three things. One, it's a perspective on how to work with young people. Second, it's an approach that allows us to change and transform our systems and supports that support the ecosystem where young people work, live, and play. And third, it is a strategy, meaning that we change the strategy of what we're trying to achieve with young people and our engagement with them in our classrooms, in our juvenile probation systems, in our social work systems. This healing-centered engagement is a strength-based approach, and it focuses on advancing a holistic way of thinking about healing and well-being, and it centers culture, race, and identity at the center of our well-being. Because oftentimes it is aspects of our identities that are harmed as a result of who we are. If you're an African-American young person, there's oftentimes transgressions with the police. If you're gay, lesbian, or transgendered, that's part of your identity. There are oftentimes harm as a result of being transgendered, gay, lesbian in our communities. If you're Latino or Asian or poor or white, right? And poor and white, that these are parts of our identities that oftentimes are harmed in our society. And so the last part, when we talk about healing-centered engagement, it means that we place these things, those things that have harmed us, parts of us that have been harmed, at the center of our engagement with young people, not at the periphery. So I've talked a lot, right? So how do we do it? How do we actually begin to think about engaging and moving in healing-centered engagement in our work? The first thing I want to say about how we do it, as Bankole mentioned earlier, is that we have to cultivate a sense of curiosity. Oftentimes in our institutions, we are given a step-by-step recipe, right? Here's a curriculum, go do it. That transforms our young people. And healing-centered engagement doesn't work that way. While we do have a curriculum and while we do have steps, it is about transformation of who we are and how we show up, supported by the systems and supports in our institutions that allow us to have an impact. And so it is a mindset shift in how we engage in young people. And that happens at three levels. So there are principles that we use to actually create those shifts that are necessary in our work. And these principles are critically important as we think about how we provide supports to young people in our systems and institutions. The first is working with individual bias and assumptions about other groups of people and how we actually get underneath and heal from our own bias. But we also have to heal from things that happen to us. Sometimes our engagement and work with young people, how we perceive young people, is the result of our own trauma, our own upbringing. And so we actually have to think about how we actually come to support young people. The second is our relationships, right, with interpersonal, and that's the teams that we're in, that is who we work with, that's how we relate to one another, right? So we think about the how our teams and our interpersonal relationships have an impact on young people. And then, of course, third is the policies and practices of the institution. Now, again, we have to change at all three levels in order to create healing-centered systems. And here's how we do that. So the second principle is that we use 5 points of information and engagement we call karma. And so karma stands for culture, agency, relationships, meaning, and aspirations. So we have a little, let's go to the first slide of culture. So culture means that we are developing an awareness of our own and others' racial and other social identities. It means that we're actively engaged in conversation about identity. It means that we're sharing experiences about the ways we've been harmed from aspects of our identity. And that means we're thinking about integrating and identifying culturally appropriate responses and supports to young people based on their identity. It means we have conversations about who we are and why it matters. The second principle is called agency. And agency is critically important. Agency is the individual and collective capacity to act and create change that addresses the root and personal challenges in our community. It means that we're thinking about, we're providing young people with supports around understanding the root causes of challenges in their schools and communities. We're providing civic education, but we're looking at how young people are responding to the issues that create their harm. I want you to remember the video that we showed as an opening with Hala and soon to be Dr. Corey Green's work. This is an example of agency where young men and women who've experienced significant amounts of trauma on their own created their own work to heal from their exposure to trauma. That is an act of agency. And as they are creating and working through Hala, that act in and of itself provides a sense of well-being. Now, agency is based in years of research, most notably the research at the University of Miami by Isaac Prelatinsky, who's engaged in years of research about the relationship between agency and well-being. And Isaac Prelatinsky suggests to us that when we are engaging in responding to those things that cause harm to us, that act of responding and engaging provides a sense of control and well-being in our lives. And so agency is an important part of how we think about the healing process. The next is relationships, right? And relationships are critical. And we know from our own work, 30-something years and working, blood, sweat, and tears with young people in their schools, in their neighborhoods, in their homes, and in the institutions, that relationships matter the most. Relationships matter the most. And unfortunately, there are ways that we have been taught about relationships that prevent healing. There are two kinds of relationships. There are transactional relationships, and then there are transformative relationships. In my own training as a youth development professional, as a researcher, as an executive director, and as a sociologist, my own training only trained me how to have transactional relationships with young people. And likely your training did the same. And transactional relationships are important. They're sufficient, they're necessary to have transactional relationships. And transactional relationships are those kind of relationships that are a function of our titles. If I am the executive director, you are the employee. If I'm the probation officer, you are the youth. And those are necessary and sufficient, but they don't oftentimes get us to healing. So we need to begin to cultivate, move from only transactional relationships, and then also bring forth transformative relationships. And those transformative relationships are based in vulnerability and empathy and connection. Transformative relationships are those kind of relationships that are a function of our humanity. If you know, for example, if you have transformative relationships, think about people that you're really close to. Your best friend, your spouse, maybe even some young people that you're working with. It's likely that that relationship that you've cultivated with them is based on something transformative. They've shared something personal with you, you've shared something with them, and in that exchange of empathy, you've created a transformative relationship. Now I know there's systems, and there's rules, there's boundaries that are a result of our titles, and I understand that we have to recognize and respect our professional roles and titles and boundaries in our engagement with young people. But it's also time that we re-examine them. And in order to create the kind of relationships that are necessary for healing, we need to begin to think about what might transformative relationships look like in my social work, in my criminal justice system, in my engagement with young people as a youth development professional. The next is meaning. And meaning is an important part of our transformative process. Meaning means that we're thinking about who we are in our work, where we're going, and the purpose we were born to serve. It means that we remind ourselves why we got into this work in the first place. We didn't oftentimes get into work to serve young people to make $1 million, y'all. We got into work to actually make a difference. But sometimes the grind, the bureaucracy, the paperwork, the reports, the budgets, all of that stuff gets in the way of and it allows us to forget why we're actually engaged in this work. And so this principle of meaning means that we integrate into our practice, in our staff meetings, in our conversations with young people, ways that we begin to think about why it's important that we get into this work. One way we think about meaning is we try to focus on the assets that young people bring rather than the liabilities. It means that if a young person has committed a crime, a young person may have broken the law, but that young person might also be love reading, or that young person also may really have a desire to start his or her own business. It means that we think about the assets that our young people are bringing, and that those assets give us more fruitful meaning in our work. And then lastly, when the last principle is around aspirations. And aspirations is important. It's important because oftentimes, and I know I'm guilty of this in my initial training, is that we're focused on solving problems. That much of our thinking, our engagement is finding young people housing, getting young people jobs, getting them not to recommit and recidivate, getting them out of trauma and violence. And that's important. But aspirations means that we also focus on their goals, their hopes, and their dreams. The research suggests that when we are able to focus on aspirations, that sense of future goal orientation provides young people a sense of well-being, purpose, and direction. But we also have to cultivate aspirations among ourselves as adult allies. And aspirations are a series of conversations and practices that allow us to not just focus on problem solving, while it's important, but we also have to focus on possibility creating, focusing on what young people want, their assets, and who they want to become. And so these principles of what we call karma, culture, agency, relationships, meaning, and aspirations are critically important. I'm going to quickly go through some implementation that we want to think about. And while we won't have time to do a deep dive in implementation, it is important that we think about some steps to creating healing-centered practices in your work. So you see on one side of the pyramid is individual, interpersonal, and institutional practices. That means that we include these parts of our journey to healing-centered engagement with cultivating practices as youth workers and practitioners at the individual level. It means that we focus on activities and conversations and building our teams. And it also means that we focus on thinking about the institutional policies and practices. So on the other side of the pyramid, there's some steps. The first step is, how do we think about our own healing? Let me give you a quick example. In my own work, in our work here at Flourish Agenda, we give our employees an opportunity to take wellness days. Those wellness days allow them to engage in individual practices. We also begin every meeting with a social emotional check-in, because we think it's important that every employee has an opportunity to talk about and express how they're feeling. That's just an individual practice. We also think it's important to establish a cohort of practitioners. We're not suggesting that you transform the entire system of 15,000 workers overnight, but bring together a group of 5 to 10 stakeholders in your institution. That could be practitioners, that could be management level, it could be the young people themselves, but a group of stakeholders. We call them a cohort of transformative practitioners. And those cohort of practitioners begin to think about healing-centered practices from their perspective in the institution. Young people have a way of thinking about healing-centered engagement. Adults have a way of thinking about healing-centered, practitioners, adult practitioners, as well as management. And then you begin to build those relationships that we talked about. We provide you with some guidance about the strategies of how you do team building, about how you actually begin to change your case, what you say in a case management meeting, how you begin to engage adults, parents and caregivers in that process. And then as we move to the institutional level, we begin to take an inventory of the policies and practices that either create harm or create healing. The laws and policies that we have, sometimes we are unaware of how they hurt or harm young people. It could be something as simple as, if an adjudicated young person who's incarcerated may be able to see their parents once or twice a week, but they have to see them behind 4-inch glass. Well, the intent might be to support that young person by seeing their caregiver twice a week, but to see them behind 4-inch glass sends another message. And so it simply means that we look at our policies and practices and try to get underneath how those policies and practices hurt or harm young people. Then once we are able to develop some policies and practices that advance a healing-centered strategy, then we pilot and test those, and then of course develop some type of progress towards healing. We actually develop metrics in our institutions. What perception do young people feel safe? How can young people and adults measure their relationships? How much trust exists in this institution, right? So we can begin to develop metrics of healing and then begin to track our progress at the individual, interpersonal and institutional level towards well-being. I want to end by saying, as I began, that we are in a place of trauma and transformation. And each one of us has a role to play. Whether we like it or not, we will eventually be in a post-COVID world. We have all of us have a choice to make about whether we want to engage with young people that keep us in a world and an environment of trauma, or really embrace healing-centered practices that move our work and our institutions towards healing-centered engagement. I want to thank you for this quick overview of healing-centered work, and I want to turn it back over to Bankole. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Shawn Ginwright. Really appreciate your powerful words. As usual, I always learn something new, and so we're really thankful that you had that really powerful breakdown on the healing-centered engagement. I really appreciate that. Now we're going to hear from a few stakeholders who represent Juvenile Hall from a policy perspective, institutional perspective, as well as a community perspective. Before I get started, I would like to introduce all three panelists who will be speaking today. First, I would like to introduce Aman Sabatu. Aman is an attorney, technical assistance provider, facilitator, and researcher in the field of criminal justice reform, violence prevention, youth, and community development. He is an Oakland native. Aman serves on the board of Brotherhood of Elders Network. Next panelist, I've had the privilege of working side by side with Brooklyn Williams. Brooklyn has supported alternative continuation schools for over 15 years and has been directing programs for youth involvement in juvenile justice systems for 20 plus years. This includes serving as a program director for Project Reconnect and Freedom Schools at Camp Sweeney. Our last panelist I had the pleasure of meeting about 2 years ago at our annual camp that we do called Camp Akili. Corey Green. Corey is a formerly incarcerated co-founder and Healing Justice Organization organizer with of how our lives link together. Excuse me, Corey. Sorry for butchering that. Corey is currently invested in creating and supporting and developing integrational youth-led citywide healing justice movement. And like Dr. Shawn Ginwright just mentioned, Corey will be a doctor very soon. So we're very excited about that, to have another ally in the doctor realm. Okay. First, I would like to pass it over to Aman. Aman, are you present?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We got you on mute, sir. Hold on 1 second.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Yes.
All
got the
right.
thumbs up.
You there?
Yes. Check, mic check 1 2. Thank you, Bonk, and thank you to everyone that's on the call right now. Wish we could be in person with you, but I guess we'll have to deal with this virtual world for now. Like Bonk said, my name is Aman Sabatu. I primarily work criminal justice reform. I have a lot of experience working with a lot of the different types of agencies that are on this call right now. And also, I'm the only person in my family that's not from New York. And my grandfather was NYPD for over 40 years. And I think if he could hear this conversation, he would be quite amazed at kind of where the climate has shifted. And I think it would be a little bit beyond his imagination to think that we'd have law enforcement agencies and other youth serving agencies talking about healing centered engagement. And he would be like, what the hell is that? So I appreciate that this is a shift for folks. And I think, it's a very promising framework and one that I'm seeing adopted in different places. And so in my short few minutes today, what I primarily wanted to do was share at least one example of a law enforcement agency, a probation department that has kind of engaged in this shift from being trauma informed to the healing centered engagement framework, and what some of their high level lessons and challenges were along the way. And so here locally, there was a probation department that I previously worked with in a technical assistance capacity. Their plan was to bring in they did bring in an outside TA provider to really work with them on implementing culturally rooted healing circles, right? And this was them, doing somewhat of what Shawn spoke on earlier, which is the culture piece of the karma model, right? Using culture for healing. And so their initial thought was to have healing circles, and they wanted to primarily focus on community and clients. And as Shawn mentioned, as we learned that, systems often think that it's the community and the clients that need healing. And then, they often realize that it's the healing needs to happen internally as well. And so, what they did initially was have their department heads, the chiefs of both juvenile and adult probation, as well as police and different directors of agencies. They had them all participate in some healing circles and engage in a reflective process. It was there that they realized that they really had a lot of work to do internally in order to be able to move towards a healing centered engagement framework. So some of the key steps along the way for them was, one, they found it extremely important to have buy-in from leadership, right? Have champions in leadership that, made this a priority. We know that there's often a hierarchy in these agencies. And so it was important to have that leadership and that buy-in from the top. A financial investment. So we know that systems often, show what they value in their budget. And so prioritizing the healing center framework, the commitment to really seeing what this could look like in their system was important. And then more importantly was this long-term commitment to a culture shift. As we know, law enforcement agencies tend to have a culture of punishment and control, and that shift to a culture of healing, it's not easy, it's not quick, and it certainly takes a long-term commitment to see it through. In doing this, they came up against several challenges. The the probation chief there said that she felt like, as far as her staff, she inherited a bunch of hammers, right? And she didn't have a full toolbox set that she needed in order to implement a healing-centered engagement framework. She thought that she could use certain skill sets, such as, clinical social workers providing some of the functions that probation officers typically serve. She thought that, perhaps there would be some credible messengers in the community that could perform some of the functions that some of her POs primarily were serving. So what they did was try to embark on a process to train their parole officers on specific skills that they deemed necessary in order to engage in a healing-centered framework. And so in other jurisdictions, New York is one that's well known for its use of credible messengers. And so that may be one way a system can go about incorporating this into their work. Another challenge they experienced was resistance from unions. Quite frankly, there were, in their probation union, they thought that this maybe signaled a demise of the probation job as they knew it, the traditional function and core. And so, that is a reality that they're forced to deal with, and they're forced to look and see, who in their staff can really come along with them on this journey, and, who may need some additional work and training in order to really deliver this culture shift that is necessary. And then another piece that we know, with agencies is leadership transitions. And so in this particular jurisdiction, the chief who initiated this work eventually left. But when she left, she made sure that her successor also had these same values around healing-centered engagement, and was willing to kind of carry the torch into the next phase of the work. So I want to get to our next panelist, Brooklyn. I just will share one super quick example from here in Oakland, where I am right now. And it's a newer example, but the Oakland Police Department is, currently involved in a community-driven diversion program where, young people who get in trouble with the law instead of being processed by the courts and probation, go before, a board of community members, elders, youth development professionals. And the focus is around healing, around culturally centered healing. And the young people, are given a chance to have their record, shredded if they comply with the program, engage in the services and supports, and engage in the healing process. So that's another way that an institution is trying to incorporate what we're talking about today. Thank you, Bonk.
Thank you so much. All right, man. Really appreciate that. That was very insightful, and definitely painted a picture of some of the work that can happen and some of the challenges that can occur when this work comes up. Now we would like to hear from Brooklyn Williams. How you doing, Brooklyn?
Hey, good afternoon, Bonk. Thanks for the warm welcome and for the introduction. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
You good? All
yeah,
right.
You're good to go.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. It is definitely a pleasure to be speaking with you today. I want to thank Flourish Agenda for the invitation and for the partnership over the last 18, 20 years that we've been working together. As Bonk said in the introduction, most of my work has fallen within, 3 different buckets: the juvenile justice system, done programming within detention center, as well as working and serving families and young people in the community. I've also had a long stretch in alternative education, schooling settings within Oakland. And then definitely have done all that through partnerships with community-based organizations. And so those are my 3 buckets. That perspective, that work over the last 20 years has really allowed me to see firsthand what the school to prison pipeline looks like. What is the contribution of schools and those institutions that create conditions that often get young people into the juvenile justice system, and also what happens within our juvenile justice system that then has young people exiting, returning to the school system, and that cycle. And so it's given me an interesting perspective. Before I get into the details, I will be talking about a program called Freedom School that I was able to run at Camp Sweeney here in Alameda County for 5 or 6 years. But I think for me, it's important for me to kind of zoom out and talk about how I approach this work and a little bit of my perspective on it. I think that right now we are in a very historic moment in history in this country. I feel like change is in the air. I think we can all feel it. I think that there's a window that is open for us who are in the world of reform, in the world of trying to make a difference, trying to make change. Those windows tend to not last very long. So we do kind of have, I would say, a window that's not going to stay open forever, but there's definitely an opportunity here to lean into. And I've been really doing a lot of reflection about the role of leaders during crisis. And at this point, we're on, where there's layers of crisis. Even in California today, I woke up to the wildfire smoke. We're dealing with toxic air. We want to talk about toxins, like it's crisis on crisis on crisis. And so what are the leaders? What are the role of leaders during that time? I think that I've always been a student of history. I think that's one thing that all of us at Flourish Agenda have spent a good amount of time is studying that. And what I'm reflecting on right now is the history that our country went that our country went through as we were approaching civil war, and the role of those leaders during those times. And the way that I see that is some of us come to this work from like more of a Frederick Douglass perspective, meaning that we're looking to change policies. We're looking to push, the powers that be to create policies that create systemic change. And then some of us approach the work more from a Harriet Tubman perspective, meaning we're doing direct service, that we can't wait for the policy to change. We're not waiting for the Civil War. We have to do what we can while we can with what we have. And so thinking about that, I think all of us as leaders have to have that self-awareness around what is our role in this work? How are we approaching it? And how do we work together? How do the Frederick Douglasses and the Harriet Tubmans work together? And also, I just want to acknowledge that, Lincoln is in there as well. And we have some folks approach this work and they come to this work with more privilege because of the conditions in the society, that we live in, with more power. And so what's the role of those of us in this work that have more privilege versus, a Frederick Douglass who had to free himself and then was pushing for policy change. Same with Harriet Tubman, who went back and got did what she could while slavery was still in place. So that's just the way I see it. That means that we all have to have a good degree of self-awareness, coming back to the role of the adults in this work, and also social awareness around what are the other roles that the adults who are approaching this work have. So after 20 years of doing this work, we have this opportunity for change, I feel. I think that the role of reform, like I see reform now as a harm reduction, essentially. So those of us who've ever worked with young people or anybody around like substance abuse models around harm reduction, that's how I see reform. I think right now that, we've been moving furniture around in our dysfunctional houses and calling it progress. And I think this moment in history is what it's asking for is for us to build new houses. We have to just stop moving the furniture around in these houses. We need to build the new houses. And obviously, that's going to take some strong leadership. It's going to take some bold, courageous leadership with folks willing to take chances and understanding that, the people who came before us had to do the same thing. And so that's our charge right now. So how do we do that? It's the question. And I do want to share that, we have some success in this program. It's called Freedom School. Is a partnership between 4 major organizations. Partnership is going to be something that comes up regularly and has to do with relationship, right? When we talk about the karma model, relationships are not just about individuals, but they're also about institutions. And so the 4 institutions that we partnered with, Alameda County Probation Department, obviously. Within that, we have the Alameda County Office of Education, the Children's Defense Fund, which is a national umbrella for Freedom School. So you have a larger national agency. And then you have the local CBO that I worked for at the time called Lincoln, who had the experience of implementing the Freedom School program. And so my job was to get all of these institutions who have their own struggles, who have their own internal, conflict and strife and issues, and also have that across systems. Is that how do I get everybody to play nice in the sandbox, if you will, in service of young people? And so the way that we have to focus on that is focusing on our leaders. And I think Dr. Ginwright really spoke to that, is how are we taking care of our leaders and how are we identifying our leaders? So that was really important across all of our systems. So you know, which teachers from the County Office of Ed were identified, which probation staff from the probation department. I had some agency over my hiring practices, which is something, you know, hopefully I can get into in the next session. And so leadership and environment. If we're trying to modify behavior in young people, those are the two top things that we need to focus on, is not just supporting the leaders that we have currently, but also how are we being really intentional about hiring? What are the different types of assessments, and what is the profile? What is the prototype of the type of person that we want? Oftentimes we have adults who have expectations of young people that they're actually not meeting themselves, right? So for example, if we want young people to be self-reflective, if we want them to heal, but coming back to the top of this training or this webinar, which is how are we doing that for ourselves? And how are the young people seeing adults doing that for themselves? In other words, walking the walk. So for me, those are the two things that we focused on during this Freedom School program. The outcomes were pretty phenomenal. Actually, we had, we were able to get the young people to a 6-week program, and they were able to raise their grade level reading 2 grades within 6 weeks. So they, you know, as we all know, our young people often come to us behind, right, in their literacy rates and all of those good things. We were able to use the cultural model that Freedom School provides. I do encourage you all to look it up. It is something that has been implemented in several probation departments across the country. So I will be able to get into more detail in future sessions around that, but culture is a key, leadership was a key, partnership was a key. And how are we not just using adult leadership, and I'll wrap it up because I know I only have a few more seconds, but did want to plant the seed of the importance of youth leadership. Is how are the adults who are leaders empowering young people and giving them the agency and tapping into that genius within. A lot of our young people end up in juvenile justice are leaders. That's how they got there, actually. And so how are we helping them to channel that leadership? How are we helping to develop them and have agency around their environment? And so those are some 4 of the elements that I wanted to lift in this very brief time that I had with you all. And hopefully I can get into more detail in some in the subsequent sessions that we'll be having. So thanks, Bonk, for the time. I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Oh my God, that was beautiful. You know, I loved all of your analogies from the Lincoln to yeah, it was beautiful. I appreciate that, Brooklyn. Thank you so much. And our last panelist, Corey Green. Corey, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. What's good?
Hey, good to see you, brother. You look good, man.
Thanks a lot, big bro. Good to see you too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, the floor is yours, brother.
Yo, peace, everybody. Good morning, afternoon. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Big shout out to my big sister Nidra, Dr. Ginwright and Flourish Agenda for giving us this opportunity to come together. And also shout out to our ancestors. You know, today I just came back today's my daughter's birthday. She lived to be about 44 days. And I went to go celebrate her birthday today. I think that just gets to the point Shawn talked about, you know, as we do this work, how are we as adults and as young people, allies, how are we doing our own healing, and, you know, how we're journeying our own selves. And today I got a chance to grieve, got a chance to celebrate and get re-energized. Yeah, man, I'm formally incarcerated, spent 8 years in prison. August 25th, I'm defending my dissertation. My mother, my family, we're from the Delta, Mississippi. I grew up in Queens, New York, in urban settings and hallways. And I've been organizing and running and getting led in the organization the last 15, 20 years. So that's kind of like the context that, like, where I'm swimming at and thinking about my interactions with community, my interactions with my own self, my interactions with the criminal justice system, as a person, as a history, as a family, as a geography. I think I'm gonna tell a story about the work that our young people have been doing the last couple of years in something we call the Healing Justice Movement, that Dr. Shawn Ginwright, Kara Page, so many elders and people today before have been talking about how our culture, how our ancestors have technologies and wisdoms to heal each other, and how you put that in practice, how you put that into institutional practice, individual practice, and cultural practice to sustain, particularly our young people, but to sustain the wellness of our society. But before I go there, I think Shawn did a wonderful job of really like laying down a lot of important points of healing center engagement. And I just want to just on top of that, just say something for us at Holla, which I think is important for all of us too, Shawn, to it. And I kind of already opened with it, is saying that Holla really came to birth in prison and through a lot of prison organizing and a lot of ancestor and cultural work that turned into pedagogy. And I'm gonna just throw out a couple of things before going to the story. In the 70s, this men in Greenhaven Correctional Facility did the first study on criminal justice that brought race, geography, and all this together. And it talked about the 7 neighborhoods. And I heard us talking about neighborhoods who were going through stuff for a long time. And this research in the 70s said that although Blacks and Latinos made up 28% of the New York population, they made up 85% of the prison population. And that 75% of them came from 7 neighborhoods in New York City. And then the research asks, what is the future implications? And you gotta know this research was done in the 70s where the prison population was about 400,000. This is before the boom. So they was already predicting what was coming and what we was going into. From that research, the men in prison and the women in prison started developing pedagogy, started developing curriculum to respond to this. And one of the things that came out of that is a program called the Resurrection Study Group. And not to go too deep into that, that's a whole nother story, but just the prerequisite to get into the Resurrection Study Group was you had to go through an 18-week Black study course. So you can just understand that the people who were in the Resurrection Study Group, the kind of intensity of Africanism, community organizing, leadership within the prison. This group had annual conferences, legislation conferences inside of the prison with the assembly people from the 7 neighborhoods every year. That's how they was organizing. So they was bringing the same neighborhoods, assembly people inside the prison to explain what was going on and have conversations with them. They was organizing and educating the local community around the prison. Not only doing a lot of work inside of the prison. And one of the key things that came from that is saying that us in prison, and it had a really important analysis of historical trauma, saying that we gotta heal ourselves, and let's get back to healing justice and healing center work, as a prerequisite as we go to heal our communities. As a prerequisite before we go lead our community, before we build institutions, before we go back to the community. So all of the 18-week Black study courses, the deep study inside of prison, that was all work just to get us ready to come outside and be assets to do the work that we need to do and make sure that we had a little bit of okayness in us. And then I'm gonna fast forward a little bit because I think Holla, we took that wisdom from prison and a lot of that wisdom that Shawn was talking about in Karma and those healing center engagement, and we created a program that consists of an 18-month process because we know we can't do this in 6 weeks. We know we need time to think about how we build culture, how we make it meaningful, how we build real relationships that are that have the chance to help us struggle with each other, help us have transformative interactions. And sometimes transformative interactions takes time to cook up. So we said we need an 18-month process. We need to be intentional about what we're doing, what kind of activities, what kind of rituals. Like, how you gonna show up as the adult? So that's one thing. And then the first 6 months was deeply about learning us, studying, but we didn't really go outside. We were just talking to us. We was arguing a lot. We was figuring us out. We did a lot of study. What's history told us? What's going on in the world? What's going on in your house? The second part of it, we took that outside and we started adding on and building on the work that Dr. Shawn Ginwright and Flourish Agenda and a lot of other folks were doing around healing justice. And we started having vulnerable conversations with young people in New York City that we felt like was us, who wasn't talking about the stuff, who wasn't talking about healing. And we said, who we want to reach out to? And we came up with a chart paper, 80 different organization blocks, projects, Rikers Island. And we started emailing them, calling them, knocking on their doors. And over time, we end up doing the first year 30 circles. And the circles open up with bars, one-on-ones, big circles. Like it had a lot of different things in it. But the point that I want to get to is, as we started doing this with the young people, some places we went to were inside of Rikers Island. Some places were in residential homes where young people were locked away in. And when we left, the staff was saying like, yo, the things that y'all did, the stuff that they were saying, the way that they was acting, we never seen them act that way before. How did y'all, like, and they started asking us to come in and train them. And must I say, this is all of our young people, 19 to 26, that's are leading most of these trainings in these circles. So these Department of Health in New York, they asked us to train their staff. New York Police Department, particularly the 79th Precinct, we was training, we had a diversion program about to go off, and we was doing a lot of training with the police department there. Countless Columbia universities, and countless schools of social works. And these are young people who are bringing this kind of healing-centered engagement pedagogy and ancestral and grassroots pedagogy and sharing it with adults. Because they like, whatever you doing to get young people to trust, to open up. And a lot of it goes back to what Shawn was saying. A lot of the trainings that we do with them is really about, who are you? It's about the C. It's about how you come to this work. And it's about the M. What is your values? What get in the way of your values? Like, do you enjoy working every day? Do you enjoy the people you work around every day? And as we unpack some of these things and put those conversations in place, it gives adult and sometimes just people who in titles, because they don't see themselves as nothing more than entitled sometimes. And we had that in the conversations, like when we talk about transformative versus transactional. Some people in our circles with social workers said, I only see myself as my title. And that was some of the feedback that we had. How do we get outside of our title? So I say all that to say that I think like Brooklyn was saying, I heard us at the beginning really say that this is a really important moment. And we really talked about what is our role as leaders. And sometimes that also just means like, how do you be honest? Like how do you ask yourself, where do you struggle at? Where are you struggling at as a leader? Like where do you hope to grow at? And find a community, find yourself first, but find a community you can share that with and you can build with. Because it's not about the biggest room of healing and growth is the room of improvement. It's not, we all good, we all dope, we're all doing great work. But when we're thinking about Harriet Tubman, we're thinking about our role as leaders, the biggest room is the room of improvement. So how do you ask yourself? How do you be gentle with yourself enough to get to that space in you that you can get to a deeper level of improvement, for you and your peoples. And I will close with just some spirit, a little poem. And because anything we do got rhythm, got vibration, got our ancestors in it. And this poem is called, This is for Our Ancestors. So this is for our ancestors, particularly the ones that stand with us and plan with us. We talking about a pedagogy of patience. They still waiting for your transformation and for us to heal from all the steel blazing and generation after generation of living out the plantation. This is for our ancestors, particularly the ones that get killed for you, sacrifice and build for you. I'm talking about indigeneity without no regulation. Culture is our education, emotional communication. Vulnerability is what we embracing. This is for our ancestors, particularly the ones that love you when they don't got to, but love you because they got you. This is for our ancestors, particularly the ones that stand with us and plan with us. I'm talking about a pedagogy of patience. They still waiting for your transformation and for us to heal from all the steel blazing and generation after generation of living out the plantation. That was for our ancestors. Thank you.
Woo! Okay, now, hold on. Wait a minute. Corey, hey, listen, man, that was really powerful. I felt all of the passion behind what you said. I'm really thankful that you shared an aspect of yourself that I don't know, we don't often get a chance to see this within our work. Sometimes we approach the work in one particular angle, but you are the epitome and embodiment of healing-centered engagement. You are the walking model of what that looks like to be incarcerated and now to be on the 25th of August to be arguing your dissertation. I mean, that's just such a beautiful process, right? And it's a reminder to trust the process, and it's a reminder that this work actually works. And so thank you so much for lifting up the ancestral aspect of our work and the cultural aspect, because that is one of our principles, and that's the very first principle, and it's something that we do on a continuous basis. Thank you for sharing the insight inside of the work that you guys have been doing and the foundation behind the work that you're doing. Thank you all panelists who have shared. It was once again very insightful, and I'm just really thankful that you guys were able to share a little bit of yourself and the work that you do around healing-centered engagement. So thank you very much. In closing, we just want to thank everyone that was here today. Thank you for participating. Thank you for being present. Thank you for being a part of this conversation around healing-centered engagement. We look forward to the many conversations that will be happening outside of this conversation, because we know that this is the beginning. This is the foundation conversation that we're having right now in this particular moment. For those participants as a part of the NYS Regional Youth Justice Team, you will soon receive an invitation to participate in 2 follow-up events with Flourish Agenda over the next few months. The first event will focus on healing-centered engagement, skill building, and second will focus on the healing-centered engagement implementation, okay? And for those not a part of the Regional Youth Justice Team, feel free to reach out to our flourishagenda.com or follow us on social media, IG, Facebook, so you could just be in contact with us. You know, we would love to hear from you if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or if there are things that came up for you or you would like a little bit more information. Please feel free to reach out to us. That's what we're here for. We're here to make these meaningful connections. As another one of our Karma principles, we're here to have that dialogue and that conversation of a larger conversation. So once again, thank you all for being present. I appreciate you. And thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. For all the sponsors and the participants, thank you once again. And we look forward to speaking with you all soon. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Flourish Agenda. When we're winding down, let me just stick a pin in the next steps. We have already identified some dates in September and October, and even a date in November for the closing session for those who will be doing this work through the Regional Youth Justice Teams, the Partnership for Youth Justice. And so those of you who work with the Division of Criminal Justice Services and the partnership, you'll be hearing about those dates specifically very, very soon. We want to push the work out through the Regional Youth Justice Teams and the framework that we have through the partnership. So that's the work for the Division of Criminal Justice Services and our partners in the Office of Children and Family Services and others after this. I want to just take a moment and tell you how much you lifted up my spirit with this presentation. I look forward to calling you Dr. Green real soon, Brother Corey. And I want to just lift up the fact that the framework that you're talking about with leadership and dealing with issues of deep end culture is part of the framework that we're using here at the Division of Criminal Justice Services to push our agenda forward. So the healing-centered engagement now, I think, will be part of that framework. And we also think it fits very nicely with the racial and ethnic disparity work that's coming out of the Office of Youth Justice, the girls' justice issues, the trauma issues, and certainly the work that we're doing with our internal partners in probation and public safety. So I think this has been very rich for us to see how this can fit with the work that we're trying to do. So again, Flourish, I'm so glad that we had a chance after 4 or 5 years of dancing around together to finally come to the table and have this conversation. I look forward to working with you through the rest of this year and into 2021. I don't know if we had time for any other issues or comments, but if not, we can close this out and look forward to the next steps that we have in mind. There's a lot of comments coming in. Please reach out to our office at the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services, the Office of Youth Justice, and we'll fill you in on how you can work with our regional youth justice teams. And if you're already engaged with a regional youth justice team and want to embark on this work, or there are folks out there who are doing the healing work in New York State, Richard Smith, Lisa Gooden in the Capital District, and others, we would love for you to work with us to champion this work and move it forward. So again, be in touch. Thank you so much, everyone. And I think this will conclude our first webinar, but it is not the last.